Right, welcome back to Power Lunches South Africa. Of course, I did promise you a conversation with a panel of business leaders on the more stringent lockdowns that have been imposed on the country. And for that conversation, I'm joined by Martin Kingston from B4SA South Africa. He is the chairman of the steering committee, and Wendy Alberts, the CEO of the Restaurant Association of South Africa. But Martin is a very, very busy man, of course, as you can imagine this morning. So we'll start with him. Martin, just tell us, I mean, with the closure of Gauteng, I think that's really the biggest thing. Does it make sense for the president to close off the country's economic hub in South Africa?
Well, I don't believe that he has closed off the economic hub. Zinati has taken the necessary measures that we were all advocating in the face of not just a wave, I would argue it's a tsunami in the context of the third wave. It's extremely pernicious. We know that the Delta variant is at large. And we should all be very concerned for our health, the health of those that we are concerned about, our nearest and dearest, our colleagues, but indeed anybody in society. We should be at home, not at work, to the extent that we can avoid traveling, so that we can avoid putting any undue pressure on the health system and limit the number of people who will be infected, who will become ill, and unfortunately who will die. There's a consequence of that. The consequence, of course, is that we're having to restrict movement. There are certain sectors that are being adversely affected, most particularly and specifically for the next 2 weeks, obviously the hospitality, leisure and tourism sector. And we will be discussing with government what further relief can be provided to the individuals and the businesses, particularly the small and medium-sized businesses that are the most adversely affected. But as a country, we really have absolutely no choice.
And just, I mean, you've mentioned that some of these industries, especially the hospitality industry, that has been heavily impacted, and I'm glad that you've noted that you will be in talks with the government on this. But were there previous talks with the government on how to protect this hospitality industry? Because we do know that it is the first one to be impacted when there's an economic lockdown on leisure of some sort.
Oh, there were indeed, and I'm sure that Wendy will say, and many others in the industry would be of the view that the interventions by government, by the providers of credit, were inadequate under the circumstances, and we would agree. We have limited fiscal space, but we're going to have to go back to government. We're going to have to see what flexibility there can be. I also think we need to be cautious in assuming that this is just going to be for 2 weeks. The president was very clear that level 4 or adjusted level 4 will endure for 2 weeks, and then we will reassess the situation. It may be maintained, it may be relaxed, or indeed there may be further restrictions. I don't think any of us should assume that the third wave is going to have passed in 2 weeks' time, nor indeed that Gauteng is the only province that's going to be impacted. We're going to have to effectively lock down as responsibly as we can without impairing the economy overmuch. For an extended period of time.
And just lastly, Martin, before you go, of course, another noteworthy thing is the ban on alcohol sales, which now bodes the question of where to from here in terms of investment within the alcohol industry. We did see SAB last year pulling out investments into the country after the first bans, and later coming in, but with the reduced investments. What is your outlook now going forward in terms of investment within that sector?
Yes, Zinati. Well, I think that we need to distinguish between the broad investment environment, which needs to be healing, and the circumstances that prevail in the context of the third wave. They're not the same. And I would like to hope that the industry will take a very balanced view of what needs to be done in the immediate short term. There are differing views as to whether or not alcohol is a contributory factor to pressure on the health system. In the final analysis, government sets the policy, and it is government that has the responsibility for ensuring that it limits the number of lives that are impacted, equally livelihoods. So once again, we're going to have to look at what level of support can be provided to an industry that is obviously under stress.
Very much for your time, Martin. That was Martin Kingston, the chairman of the Steering Committee for Business for South Africa. And of course, zooming into the restaurant industry, we have Wendy Alberts joining us. She is the CEO of the Restaurant Association of South Africa. Of course, Wendy, we have mentioned that, hospitality really has been decimated. Just looking at the latest restrictions on restaurants, how are your members taking in these new developments?
Whilst we appreciate that the president has difficult decisions to make, we don't believe that the decisions that have been made have really been in the interest of the restaurant industry. Once again, we're the industry that's had the most amount of impact. No consultation and limited consultation and conversations have taken place surrounding keeping the livelihoods of the beautiful people who work in our industry rest. And what we have seen through the history of all the other lockdowns is that it doesn't work. It simply opens up the illicit trade. And what it doesn't allow us to be able to move through the stage of level 3 by supporting people's livelihoods. So we're currently sitting in a very emotional space. We've got a number of people about to lose their jobs, unpaid layoffs. It's very stressful times. I can tell you that our industry certainly didn't sleep last night. And we do not understand how government has taken the stance that they've done to shut our industry down once again without looking at the solutions that we potentially can have. We sit in a space where we are expected to
All right, Wendy, we seem to have lost Wendy there. I was actually looking forward to her comments, as we do know that the restaurant industry really has been decimated. But also joining us in the panel is Cas Coovadia, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. Cas, just talk to me about how business is receiving, specifically noting some of the tighter restrictions in Gauteng, considering that a third of GDP comes from Gauteng. How is South African business taking these new stricter lockdown rules?
Look, we are obviously concerned about the impact on the restaurant industry, the liquor industry, and I think that if people are saying in those industries that people are saying that government has not consulted them effectively or sufficiently, I think government should do that. We can only depend on the announcements made by government, including the president saying that they have been informed by appropriate expertise, both in the health and science field. We do recognize that we are in the midst of a very, very severe wave of the pandemic, and government needs to take the necessary decisions to try and limit the spread of the virus and to try and protect lives, as well as trying to reduce the impact on our health system. But the economic impact of these restrictions cannot be denied. There are certain sectors of the economy that will suffer significantly as a result of this. And what we would urge, because I don't think we're out of this virus yet, and we might see different iterations and variances, and these discussions will still need to be had. And what we would urge government to do is to, as they also consult their scientists and the health people, that they also speak to beforehand and consult with those sectors of the economy that are most likely to be impacted most by additional restrictions or any other moves that government makes to contain the virus. So I think that's what we need to do. We recognize that government does need to restrict activity. We welcome the restriction of activity on gatherings. We believe those are significant vectors for spread, and those must be curtailed significantly. We also welcome the restrictions on leisure travel across borders from Gauteng and to Gauteng, because I think that we do need to try and limit any introduction into Gauteng, of the Delta variant that might be in other parts of the country, because Gauteng is under severe strain as it is.
Wendy, going back to you, a very state of affairs there that your background is reflecting an empty restaurant. Wendy, I mean, it's very concerning that you say that there have been no previous consultations with the government. I mean, was there no gap in which you could have spoken to a government to maybe say that let's maybe try and reduce capacity? For example, you say that in one table there can't be more than 5 people. Were there any gaps in which government could have extended a hand there, or you could have extended communication?
You know, on the onset, when we saw the numbers rise, we immediately approached government with potential solutions that we could put into our businesses. And we certainly asked government not to shut us down without notice. We need to effectively plan any type of closure. We need to trade off any stock that we've got. We need to support the livelihoods of people that are employed in our sector. So when the numbers started to rise, there was absolutely no consultation. As a whole, with ourselves in the liquor industry, we have put together many mechanisms and many support structures, as well as implementations of regulations and protocols that we've adhered and looked at and been able to put out and been in a regulated environment. We keep saying to government that, you know, we are custodians of liquor license and there's absolutely no need to have shut us down without notice like they have once again. What we saw through April was when we consulted with industry, we were able to find proper solutions to trade through. And we showed government that as an industry and as a country, we were able to move through the stages of the festivities by ensuring that we were able to have a business that could allow people to come in and consume alcohol and food responsibly. What we found with this latest lockdown, I think perhaps it's because there's a duality on the minister's portfolio and the crossover of a portfolio, that we haven't had the proper consultation, we haven't had the proper advocacy of people to take care of our industry. So we need to ask government who is actually taking care of the restaurant industry, who is the spokesperson within government who's advocating that we save the jobs. Because if we've learned anything through the last 14 months, is that the previous lockdowns only destroy jobs. It doesn't actually warrant for the relief that government is trying to execute for the slowdown of the spread of COVID and bringing down the numbers. What we also do know is that the level of illicit trade is going to increase, and we're going to move forward by having more people going into underground parties, lockdown parties, and difficulties in terms of being able to control those numbers. We at restaurants can control those numbers. We are able to support the regulations, and we're able to support compliancy.
And talking about that support, Wendy, I actually get your WhatsApps whenever you do communicate to the restaurant industry. And last time I checked, you were also evaluating the COVID-19 stats in terms of the transmission at your restaurants. Have you come out with any findings for that?
We constantly call to government for the statistical information and the scientific evidence, as well as all the data that they've got, and they've never been able to produce it to us. You know, and this is what we keep asking for. So we have got solutions. We can test our staff. We can sanitize the air. We can make our establishments COVID safe for every single day. But what we don't have is we don't have a collaborative relationship with government right now to be able to move through the stages of this very decimated space. And all we know is that the impact that has been put on our industry again is one that is very difficult for us to be able to move through.
And just lastly, Cas, I mean, just from your point of view, clearly the restaurant industry basically saying that they are disappointed with how government has approached this situation. From a business perspective, is this government's failure? Because now we're looking at the fact that hospitals are under pressure, oxygen is low, and we're not even hearing anything about the field hospitals that were established at the beginning of this pandemic. And the vaccination rate has been really, really low. From a business, could government have planned better for this? And, you know, maybe could they have closed borders in terms of seeing where the Delta variant was more prevalent and close the borders with concerns to people coming from those countries?
Yeah, look, I think, and again, we're not privy to the discussions government has and the information they have in taking these decisions. But I think that if there is evidence that the Delta virus is coming through certain borders, then I think we need to seriously consider closing those borders. The most critical thing for our country at the moment is to limit the spread of this virus is to get as many vaccines into people's arms as possible. And we need to do everything in our power to ensure that we do that. Now, if there is evidence to show that there is, and we are told that the Delta virus has been prevalent in some parts of the country, we then need to try and determine where the source of that entry of that virus was into our country. And if we can find the source of entry, then we've got to close that source of entry. If we continue allowing free movement of people and with the knowledge that it might actually increase the spread of that variant in our country, that would be a serious problem. So we would urge government to look at the science, to look at the data they have, and do what they need to do to actually limit the spread and the entry of any new variants into our country. And that needs to be done. Having said that, I think, look, I feel for the restaurant industry, the liquor industry, but I think what we need to do maybe as business is just to coordinate a bit better and speak to government in a coordinated way. I think it is a valid argument that government needs to inform people in good time, needs to share data that they are using to actually make their decisions, so that those sectors most susceptible to these restrictions on an ongoing basis can actually proactively put into place mechanisms to satisfy government that they are dealing with issues and criteria that government looks at when they're actually putting these restrictions into place.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. That was Wendy Alberts, the CEO of the Restaurant Association of South Africa, and Cas Coovadia, the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. Very fascinating.